Good morning, Ram Nation. We are back with another edition of DNVR Rams Live, driven by your Front Range Toyota stores. Toyota, the official vehicle of DNVR. We've got a fun episode planned for you. Obviously, it's just me today, no Dre, but I've got a lot to talk about. I'm going to get into the 2025 CSU football class, which is growing rapidly. We're at double digits now. Publicly, there's actually another couple of commits that have not announced that we should get here pretty soon. I've been waiting on an offensive lineman out of Cal. Really great size. It's been encouraging to see the type of size that they have coming in this class in the trenches, both sides. We'll get into all of that. I'll answer some questions from the mailbag online. First things first, though, I wanted to talk about Isaiah Stevens. He, unsurprisingly, was not drafted. I mean, it was kind of considered a long shot, I think, just given his age, lack of height, it's going to hurt him as well. If he's 2 or 3 inches taller, I honestly think he's a top 20 pick. Just when you look at his production, he's at the very minimum would have been drafted. Again, the age definitely comes into play when it comes to the NBA draft. That said, I mean, he honestly ended up in a really good opportunity. Signed an Exhibit 10 contract with the Miami Heat that will have the ability to get converted into a two-way contract. I'm not the best guy to explain what an Exhibit 10 is, but essentially it's a non-guaranteed one-year deal worth up to like $50K. If it gets converted, you get that. You can also get cut. It doesn't count towards the salary cap. The caveat, though, is you can also sign to the affiliate G League organization, and then you get that money as well. But what's encouraging is that Miami has a plan for Zay moving forward, not just, for Summer League. It does seem like as long as he plays, as well as we know that he's capable of, he should at least get an opportunity on a two-way deal with Miami. I will say, I think landing with a team like the Heat is kind of the perfect opportunity. Again, given that he played college 5 years, he's an older prospect. You don't really want to land on like a lottery team because they're just kind of looking for 18, 19-year-olds project picks to build for. You want like a spot where you're going to be able to play or at least have an opportunity to compete for minutes. Teams like Miami, like the Nuggets, they're going to be more open to playing some of these older guys because obviously you have the stars. And with the new CBA, I mean, it's making it more and more challenging to retain some of kind of, I want to say side pieces, but that sounds wrong. Just some of those other role players, we've experienced it here in Denver, like Bruce Brown and KCP is probably going to sign elsewhere. Because of that, if you are a contender and you've got some guys on max deals, you're going to be looking for some older, rookies that you can depend on, that you can play various roles. Maybe Isaiah can come off the bench and run their twos. That's what he's going to have to do if he's going to stick it out. He's going to have to be a guy that can run the floor. Obviously, the shooting is going to translate. I mean, he improved every year as a three-point shooter. And what I thought was great for Isaiah in terms of like how it should translate at the next level is he's a guy that can score in a variety of ways. He's not just a guy you would put in the corner and try and get catch and shoot opportunities. Sure, he could feast on those, but he can create his own shot. He can get to his spots all over the floor. 6 foot 180, not the biggest guy in the world. Also, probably not quite as quick as you would hope for if you were undersized. So he's going to have to prove he can hang on the defensive side and not be a liability there. But his handle, his passing, his IQ, his shooting, it's all NBA level. And, after covering him for the last 5 years, it wouldn't shock me if he outperformed the national expectations of him. He has always carried himself like a pro. So unselfish, has that team first mentality, which again should benefit him in a situation like Miami, where they're looking for guys that can make an impact on winning teams now. They're trying to win now. They're not building for 5-6 years from now. They're trying to compete for NBA championships. got some questions here in the Toyota chat. In the event that JN has another poor season, we move in a different direction. Do you see some of these solid commits flipping their? Oh, okay. So the question is essentially if the Rams were to move on from Jay Norvell, how would that impact CSU from a recruiting standpoint? I mean, yeah, I think most certainly if you moved on from the staff, the vast majority of these commits would decommit and probably sign elsewhere. That's not to say that you wouldn't be able to hang on to a couple. I mean, Adazio signed a couple of Bobo recruits. I think Norvell only signed one Adazio recruit, but yeah, I mean, like if there happened to be a staff change in the future, would certainly impact this 2025 class, which is looking really encouraging, and that's kind of been the theme these last couple of years. The staff's recruited well. I mean, if you look at the metrics, you look at any of the sites, 247, all that stuff. I mean, CSU and Boise State, they're at the top of the league, and then it's everybody else. You just needed to start translating to success. But I mean, yeah, if you had a rough year and had to start over, I definitely think that would be detrimental from a recruiting standpoint and just from a program standpoint. It's why this year is so important for CSU. They've got to find success. I don't want to get too repetitive. We talked about that a lot over the last couple of days. We're going to get into that 2025 recruiting news here in just a second. But shout out to Isaiah Stevens. I know I got a little bit sidetracked there trying to keep up with any questions and comments you guys may have. But I'll certainly be rooting for Isaiah. I feel really fortunate to have had the opportunity to cover him for as long as I did. I thought when we had Medved on the show a couple weeks back, he said it really well when he essentially said, how fortunate we were to have a point guard of his caliber for 5 years. That'll probably never happen again for a variety of reasons. I mean, obviously the COVID eligibility is not going to be a factor in the future. I don't think there will ever be a player that tops some of those marks that he has: all-time leading scorer, games played, assists distributed. I mean, he leads the Mountain West in all-time assists by like over 200. It's a wide margin. We're rooting for you, Zay. Athlon Sports released preseason bowl predictions. They have CSU playing Central Michigan in the Arizona Bowl. Way too early. Obviously, like there's really no substance to any of this kind of stuff. It's just the teams that they think are going to be competitive. Fun to talk about. That would obviously be kind of a unique little matchup there. Playing former CSU head coach Jim McElwain. That would be interesting. I'd be curious to see like how bitter Ram fans would be in that situation. Or, I mean, it's been a decade, has enough time passed that it would be kind of a warm welcome. That would be interesting to me. If you have an opinion on that, go ahead and throw it in the Toyota chat. But the Arizona Bowl, low-key, one of the more intriguing bowl options out of the Mountain West. Now, I'm always a big supporter of the New Mexico Bowl just for the convenience of fans being able to travel and attend it. It's an affordable spot. It's a community that really supports it. But I mean, if you could go to Tucson in December, it's no longer sponsored by Barstool. It's now sponsored by Snoop Dogg, actually. And the game's going to be on traditional TV again, which is great. It's going to be broadcast on the CW. I'd be all about that. I mean, it's certainly more appealing than like going to Boise for the Potato Bowl or something like that. That said, the Rams, they're in a position where you can't really be a beggar. You can't be a beggar, you got to get whatever you want or whatever you can at this point. I do want to shout out Lucy Nicotine. They helped me up my nicotine game in a major way recently. Like many of you, I was using a different product before, struggled to find it, lack of availability, decided to give Lucy a chance. 100% pure nicotine, always tobacco free. It's available in pouches, gums, and breakers. Breakers are pouches, but they also have this little capsule that kind of releases this liquid and it helps saturate the pouch. Some of my favorites, apple ice and mango. You can't go wrong with like a traditional espresso or mint as well. But there's something about those fruity ones. Lucy has nailed it. They're so smooth, certain products, the nicotine can be overwhelming right off the bat, makes you nauseous. Not with Lucy. It's a nice smooth ride throughout the process. The flavor lasts throughout it as well. Level up your nicotine routine with Lucy. Go to lucy.co/Rams. Use that promo code RAMS. Get 20% off your first order. Lucy offers free shipping and has a 30-day refund policy if you change your mind. Lucy.co/Rams. Get 20% off and always free shipping. Here comes the fine print. Lucy products are only for adults of legal age. Every order is age verified. Warning, this product contains nicotine. Nicotine is an addictive chemical. Again, those orders are age verified. I also want to shout out Toyota. Toyota, the official vehicle of DNVR, excuse me. Toyota, the trucks have always been a part of their DNA for generations. They're perfect for Colorado, whether you're exploring, some of the off-road trails or whether you're just, chilling on I-25. Toyota has an option that's right for you. They've got 17 models with all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive, like the Epic 4Runner. They offer more low and zero-emission vehicles combined than any other automaker to give customers numerous choices to reduce their carbon footprint. 16 different hybrid vehicles to choose from, like the Tundra iForce Max hybrid truck. Not to be outdone, Toyota SUVs take a man on the road and on the trail, so you can explore the road less traveled without sacrificing smooth city rides in SUVs like the RAV4 and Grand Highlander. Toyota is a proud partner of CSU Athletics and the official vehicle of DNVR. We got some comments in the Toyota chat. Taylor, in response to the possibility of playing Jim McElwain, I don't hold anything against Jim. Knew he wasn't going to stay long term, and he helped bring a great season. It's always been complicated, the ordeal with McElwain. I think he did a lot of positive. He got the Rams back on track, and without McElwain, the on-campus stadium certainly doesn't happen without that success and creating that little bit of boost in momentum for the program. Really, that whole 2014 season in general, it just put so much life into it, created all kinds of excitement that lasted for years. And obviously that fizzled out a little bit throughout the Bobo era, got worse in the Adazio era, and now feels like a long time ago. That said, if you did hold it against Jim for the way that he handled things, I think that would be fair. My perspective is even more unique, just given that I was a student intern on that team. Jim McElwain was really, really good to me. Gave me an opportunity. Like, I'm so thankful for that. I'm thankful for the conversations that we had over the years. But he left in a crappy way. I mean, the Florida AD comes in. I think that was Jeremy Foley back then. Comes in, flies in private. They make a big old scene out of it. Like, we're here, we're taking your coach. There's nothing that you can do about it. It was just it was not the best way to handle it. And then like doing the interview during CSU's bowl game, like there were just so many things he could have done differently. That said, I think the healthier mindset in general is always just to kind of appreciate, the positive that he did and recognize that he really did a whole lot of good for CSU football. Kevin in the Toyota chat says, I feel like if any fans have the right to be bitter at McElwain, it's the UF fans. Here's my thing. I never really understood why he took such a bad rep in Gainesville. He went to back-to-back SEC championship games in his first 2 years, I believe. I know the recruiting wasn't quite on par with what they were used to in Gainesville, and that was kind of the root of his downfall down there in the SEC. Is it's a different level of attention. It's a different level of chaos. I know he would never answer on the record, especially like to a media type, but man, I sure would love to pick his brain and be like, if you could go back, honest to God, would you do it differently? Got a good gig at CMU. They've been successful in the MAC, just got a contract extension. I got to imagine there's a small part of him that's like, man, I just would have stayed a couple more years, probably could have had a incredible 2015 season as well. That team had a lot of talent and experience, kind of underperformed under Bobo, starting with a couple of brutal losses in non-con to Minnesota and CU, where they just shot themselves in the foot. Very much Ram life, but those are topics for another day. I can get very sidetracked very quickly. Let's get into that 2025 recruiting update. The class up to 10 commits publicly. Another 1 to 2 behind the scenes. I am waiting, like I said, on that offensive line announcement. They're going after some big dudes. They're going after some really explosive dudes, especially at the skill positions. Tristan Glass, 6'4", 175-pound wide receiver out of Paris Cove, Texas. 3-star prospect, at least 15 other offers. UNLV and Memphis are interested. Some of the better G5 programs, Texas State as well. Cal and ASU also offered him. 48 catches for 654 yards, 7 touchdowns as a junior. Really long strides. He's explosive vertically. Surprisingly dangerous after the catch for a guy with that much length and size. Reminded me a little bit, just seeing the way he would kind of dance in the open field, make guys miss, and then take off, of like an early Brandon Marshall with Jay Cutler and the Broncos back in the day. I mean, B. Marsh was a big dude, but he was he was dangerous. He had some wiggle in the open field. He was explosive after the catch. He was a guy, obviously, that had a great frame that he could go up and get the ball, kind of, use his frame to shield off defenders. And you see a lot of that from Tristan Glass, a lot of him running in the open field and DBs trying to chase him down, a lot of him shaking off tackles and making plays. I mean, he's just a guy that's really fluid, really explosive with the way that he moves. You love his pure pass catching abilities, really intriguing prospect as a whole. Really, all these receivers out of Texas are very much intriguing. And a couple other guys that play receiver in Texas at the moment, but will be playing other positions at CSU, specifically on the defensive side. This staff loves to do that. And I've talked about that a lot, so I don't want to get too repetitive, especially for those that listen day in and day out. But, the best athletes at the high school level, they're typically going to be at receiver, in the back end of the secondary, edge rusher, quarterback, running back. Like, you're going to use them at those premium positions. They might not necessarily be like a star at those skill positions at the next level, but obviously they're highly athletic. You bring them onto campus, you coach them up, you develop them. And that's what you do with a guy like John Smith. 6'4", 185-pound athlete. He's at a Sterling High School in Texas as well. Played quarterback, played receiver, played a little bit of corner. He's going to play safety at CSU. Really smooth. Again, is a guy that's fluid with the way that he runs, shows really great ball skills, great instincts. I think that's going to translate really well in the back end of the secondary there. And you love a guy that's going to have that unique background. He'll see the game just a little bit differently than everybody else. I think guys that have that experience of playing both ways, it can really benefit them. And you see the way that he covers a ton of ground on both sides of the field. Like, it just feels very, very natural. He's going to be a missile coming downhill with those instincts. You think he's going to be kind of a ball hawk. I mean, I'm very intrigued about John Smith. He doesn't have a ton of recruiting interests, Missouri State and UTSA. But again, like, as a quarterback, it wouldn't translate in the FBS. As a safety with that 6'4", 185-pound frame and long strides, I really like the possibility of what he can be in a Rams uniform. Braden Thompson joined the 2025 class, 6'8", 325-pound offensive tackle. Very, very raw. He's out of Kettle Moraine High School out in Wisconsin. He only has offers from Eastern Michigan and Northern Illinois. He's a guy that's going to need some coaching up for sure. But 6'8", 325 at like 17 years old, 33.5-inch arms, 83.5-inch wingspan. I mean, those are, basically NFL characteristics as a, 17-year-old. To have those kind of traits is really intriguing. Also, he's a guy that's going to graduate early in December. So if he signs, you could assumingly get him on campus early. You would have potentially the possibility of putting him through 2 full springs and summers, an entire redshirt freshman season, without using any of his eligibility. That's a lot of time to be in the back, getting coached up from a technique perspective, but also that's a lot of time in a college weight room. That's a lot of time to be in the playbook. Like, he's a guy that you could really spend a lot of time with for 2-3 years, work behind the scenes, and then end up, having just this mountain of a man in your offensive line. And he really could be a diamond in the rough. Like, I don't want to get expectations out of hand or anything. There is a reason he's flown a little bit under the radar. But, love a Midwest guy, that feels very Big Ten-ish with the way that he has a frame, or like maybe old school, a Big 12, like a K-State type offensive lineman back in the day. I'm really intrigued by him, though. I think he's got great potential. And I know the offensive line coach, Bill Best, is very intrigued by him as well. Rounding out the most recent commits at the moment, we have a punter, Nathan Sutcliffe, at a Pro Kick Australia. Like, almost no information available on this guy online. A shockingly small amount of info available on him. Pro Kick Australia has a great track record. Obviously, it's worked out pretty well for CSU with Patty Turner, top 2 or 3 punter in the league. There's actually quite a few good punters in the league. James Ferguson Reynolds in Boise State, Aaron Rodriguez down in New Mexico. I mean, there's there's some guys that can really do it, but Patty does a great job of limiting returns. He does a great job of just doing what the staff needs him to do. He's a great teammate. He's a great leader. Very encouraged. And it's always kind of a fun story when you have the Aussie punters, or, right now, obviously CSU has a couple of international specialists, Jordan Noyes from England. It's a unique story. And I like too that some of these specialists that come from overseas, they're older. It's a high pressure position for some of these young guys, 17, 18 years old. That might be a little bit tougher to handle if you're a guy like Jordan Noyes. You're in your mid 20s, you're 27 years old, you got 3 kids. That's nothing. This is just having fun out there playing football. Patty, he did say that playing in Michigan, he puked before the game. Could you imagine that? Like, not basically starting the sport and 2 years later you're making your debut in the big house. Like, that's just absolutely insane. But really encouraging 2025 class being put together right now. I've talked about this a lot in recent weeks, but they have a really clear identity with the types of players that they want to go after, the athletic profile that they're looking for, all of that fun stuff. They have, established relationships within key pipeline states. Texas and Arizona have been very fruitful for the Rams this process. But, they've got a ton of connections in California. I still fully expect, a couple of more Cali commits to help round out this 2025 class before it's all said and done. We were probably due for a Texas heavy class. I mean, the last couple have definitely been very heavy SoCal. It's not that there hasn't been any presence from Texas, but it does feel like they were kind of due to have a, class with 7, 8, 9 guys out of Texas, the way that we have had out of Southern Cali these last couple of years. Those are the areas where talent is, man. You got to fish where the fish are. It's really as simple as that. I know that we can get a little bit caught up with narratives and wanting people to, have 20 local commits and all this. Like, nobody loves to see Colorado kids get an opportunity and to succeed at CSU more than me. And you need some of those guys. You can't get so worked up that you're recruiting guys just for the sake of it, though. Like, we need a couple of local kids, so we're going to offer this guy that has no business, being on a D1 field, that has no opportunity to pan out. And again, I'm not trying to be dismissive of Colorado high school football. Look in the NFL, plenty of examples. They're not all Christian McCaffreys, but guys that have gone on to have very successful careers. There is talent that comes out of this state. There's just more of it that consistently comes out of Southern California and out of Texas. And really, it's a law of averages. Like, the more opportunities you take in these talent-rich areas, the more likely you are to land very talented players. There's so many other factors that go into whether a player is going to be successful or not. And that's something that I don't talk about every single time we talk about recruiting, but I do try and make that clear. Like, when we highlight the positives with these guys, that's not to say that it's a guarantee that they're going to be successful or anything like that. I mean, I don't know what type of character they have. Some of these guys, I get to know them a little bit when I have them on the podcast, but even still, like, what type of work ethic do you have? How hard are you going to work in practice? Are you going to be in your playbook? Even beyond that, there's so many other factors that come into play. Like, these kids are 17, 18 years old going through incredible life change. Are they just simply going to get homesick? Is Fort Collins not going to be, an environment that turns out to be what they thought it would? Is CSU not the school that they thought it would be? There are just so many different things that can factor into whether a 17 or an 18-year-old pans out, at the collegiate level. I mean, there are plenty of guys who, frankly, I didn't think had a chance, and they completely proved me wrong. I mean, the best example of that, and a guy we're going to have on the podcast here next week, Barry Wesley, Atlanta Falcons offensive tackle. My little brother played with that dude from second grade, to high school. I never thought Barry was going to be the starting offensive tackle for CSU, let alone a multi-year starter. Doesn't get drafted, goes and plays in the XFL, gets an opportunity from there, works his way to the NFL. There were so many characteristics about Barry outside of what you could see from just watching a huddle film that you couldn't factor into the equation when trying to forecast how he was going to pan out. You don't know these things until they actually arrive. And it's just important to keep all of that in perspective. Recruiting is so much more of an art form than it is a science. Like, you can find guys that have all the right traits. You can find guys that have all the explosiveness, all the athleticism in the world. If they don't have the work ethic, if they don't have, the right habits, if they're just not comfortable in the system or at CSU. Like, it could not work out. And I want people to be clear of that. It's really, like, I feel like if you hit on maybe 2/3, three quarters of your recruits, you're doing pretty good. Obviously, if you're missing on a whole bunch of them, it's going to be pretty problematic. You're going to feel that competitively. You're going to feel some major gaps in your depth, but it's encouraging, man. It's got to translate to wins. And that's the toughest thing about this season after coming up short last year is it just puts so much more pressure to succeed. I feel like if you were coming off of a bowl win, you close that season strong, you find a way to beat UNLV, you hang on to that one, you don't blow it in Hawaii. Like, it feels so much different going into this year. I said it when Mike Rowe was on the podcast the other day. Last year should have been like 2013. 2013, they stumbled a little bit out of the gate after closing 2012 strong. I think they won 3 out of the final 5 in 2012 after a rough stretch. They beat CU, obviously, to start the year under McElwain, then lost, like 6, 7, or 8 in a row. Close the season strong. You're thinking 2013, all right, here we go. And then they blow a couple frustrating games to start that year. You lose a dumb game at Tulsa. You lose to San Jose State at Hughes, a good San Jose State team, but still, now all of a sudden it's feeling like, oh God, here we go again. We're in for another 4-8, 3-9 type year. God, there were way too many of those from like 2007 to 2012 or whatever. But they found a way to turn it around. And then you felt really good, obviously, going into 2014, especially with how the Washington State win played out and all of that. But you had all this positive momentum, and then you were able to build off of it. And even if they didn't have the season they had in 2014, like if they had another bowl season, it would have felt like the program was in a really good spot because you had back-to-back bowl years, like things were going good. And instead, last year just feels like this massive missed opportunity. You had some of the best top-end talent in the conference, and you were right there. That's what stings, is it wasn't a situation like 2022 where you weren't in some of these games. You should have won in CU. You should have won in Vegas. You should have won in Hawaii. Came up short in all 3 of those games, and that stinks. It puts you in a tough spot, especially this year where the schedule is favorable as a whole, considering you've got 7 home games and 6 first-year coaches on the slate, but you're also playing multiple Power 4 teams. You got to go out on the road and play Texas, who's a playoff contender. Going to Oregon State's going to be no picnic, and neither is Fresno State. It's a situation where you've really got to take advantage of the games that you should win. Like, this is such an important year for CSU. The games you're favored in, some of those lower level Mountain West games, the UTEP type games, like, you can't blow those anymore and expect to essentially have people believe in what you're building, which is a shame because, behind the scenes, you are doing a lot of things right. You're recruiting great. You're developing talent. You're, doing the right things within the community. I mean, I think Norvell conducts himself from a community standard better than anybody since Sonny Lubick. It's all about wins and losses, though. And if it doesn't start translating to wins and losses, all this becomes a moot point. And I know that, but it's also very easily a situation where your patience could be rewarded if they finally break through in 2024. We talked about some of the keys for that on yesterday's live show, so go check that out if you missed it. Some of the key stretches in the schedule, including a 7-game stretch where you play 6 first-year coaches with a game against Air Force sandwiched in the middle there. Huge year for CSU, encouraging things happening regarding the future, but the time to win is now. I'm going to get to some of your mailbag questions here in just a second. Get ready for the season ahead with quality shades that are built to last. Our friends at Shady Rays have you covered with premium polarized shades that won't break the bank. Premium lenses that provide great optics. They're very, very tough. I have a big dog over 100 pounds. I mean, he's rough on my personal belongings. A couple times has stepped on the Shady Rays, completely fine. What's great and what gives me peace of mind is, had he broken them with those big old paws of his, Shady Rays would have replaced them. Every single pair is backed by lost and broken replacements. Try the shades that are rated 5 stars by over 300,000 people. Exclusively for listeners, Shady Rays giving out the best deal of the season. Go to shadyrays.com, use that code DNVR for 35% off polarized sunglasses. Try for yourself the shades rated 5 stars by over 300,000 people. I also want to shout out the Circa Sportsbook. The app is available for download here in Colorado. It's ran by the same wonderful people that run the Circa Resort and Casino out in Vegas. Going to be there in a couple of weeks. I cannot wait. Genuinely, one of the cooler places I've ever been. It's an awesome place to stay. The Circa Sportsbook app offers some of the best odds around. Other books you might get minus 115, minus 120 splits. Now with Circa, they say, nah, they're going to hit you with that minus 110. They don't limit players based on winnings. Every player has the same limits, unlike other books who do limit player winnings. They've got great customer service. Like I said, they are ran by the same people that run the Circa Resort and Casino. Download the app at circasports.com. Circa Sports bets can be made while physically located in the state of Colorado. Must be 21 or older. All rights reserved. Circa Sports Colorado encourages you to gamble responsibly. Gambling problem, call or text 1-800-GAMBLER or visit problemgamblingcolorado.org. All right, if you want to get any questions in the Toyota chats, I'll answer them that way. Also have some questions here from the mailbag on X. Let me see. All right, first question from my guy, Kyle Griffin. Does Dion or Jay drive a golf ball further? I'm gonna go with Jay on that one. Jay golfs quite a bit. Dion's got the foot stuff. In terms of athletic competition, at this stage of their lives, I know Deion Sanders, one of the greatest athletes that's ever lived, one of the greatest football players that's ever been. At this stage, though, Jay would beat Dion in any athletic competition. I feel pretty confident in saying that. He can actually move, man. He's got all his toes. Like he's better suited to win. That's all I'm saying. I'm not trying to be a jerk. That's just the reality. Rory wants to know, CSU seems to be excelling in recruiting amongst the G5. Any insight on how the overall recruiting strategy has changed for CSU with the new NIL landscape? Dollar-wise, they won't be able to compete with P5 schools. So interested to hear what has changed, if anything. I think the biggest impact that NIL has had and the transfer portal really on all G5 schools is that it has created an opportunity for some high school recruits to land at places like CSU that I think in previous years would have been, SEC bound, would have been Big Ten bound. But because some of these schools like Ole Miss, CU, and in the Big 12 are so infatuated with transfers, there are some high school players that have slipped through the cracks. That's benefited CSU, both in a basketball standpoint and a football standpoint. The other thing, though, from a disparity in resources standpoint, CSU has had to get a little bit more creative. If there were NIL paychecks when Preston Williams was leaving Tennessee, he doesn't land at a school like CSU. And that's the thing. Like, I think a couple years before all this got so chaotic, the transfers coming from the bigger leagues, so many of them were just looking for opportunities to prove themselves so that they could get to the next level where the ultimate paycheck is. Nowadays, I think a lot of those guys are just chasing the check right now. And I can't say they're wrong for doing so. I mean, there's certainly no guarantees in this sport. It's just changed their perspective and the way that they're trying to operate. And CSU in tune has had to get a little bit more creative. Like when it comes to transfers, it's why you're seeing CSU look at schools like North Dakota State. It's why you're seeing CSU pull, offensive linemen from like Lamar College, like Drew Moss. They've had to get a little bit creative. Savion Henderson out of Lane College. I mean, it's really worked out well for the Rams. Honestly, in basketball and football, they've had a very high hit rate when it comes to these guys that are making the jump up in competition. And that's a huge testament to this staff's ability to identify talent, obviously to recruit and get them on campus and get them to translate here at the FBS level or at the D1 level, if you're talking about it from a basketball standpoint. But it's definitely changed things. Some of it positive, some of it negative, but it's always in a state of flux. Like 2 years from now, it'll probably be a different conversation than it is right now. I don't think most fans, even people that are really big college sports fans, recognize just how much change there has been these last couple of years. I mean, it's been chaos. Like it started obviously a couple years ago. Like we have the NIL deal with Trey McBride and David Roddy, and then I mean, it just became chaos. Like it's pay for play now. It's basically the wild, wild west with unstructured free agency. I mean, so much of it, the multi-year transfer. I mean, just so many different things have made coaching and roster retention so much harder at the G5 level. Mark, not Mark, Cutback Davis at JDN Carlsbad says, football concerned about corner, gave up 70% completions last year with a top shelf pass rush. Whoosh, woof. What says you? Also, do the Rams cover 36.5 at Texas? I'll say CSU covers the 36.5. I certainly don't think they're going to win that game. I wish it wasn't on the schedule. Fun opportunity for those that'll get to go to Austin, obviously, but would have liked to have started with a win and established a little bit of momentum. You never know, I guess. I mean, I would love for this to be a clip that gets mocked, months from now because CSU pulled off the upset. But I'm with you. I mean, there is a lot of experience returning on this defense. You got 7 returning starters. In that regard, there's reason for optimism. But I mean, the simple premise of how does a defense improve after losing a generational pass rusher is something I struggle with. So I do like the corners that they brought in, as Isaiah Sissoma out of Nevada, especially, I thought really popped throughout the spring. He's aggressive, got great ball skills. We'll see. I mean, it's really going to be on some of these guys that have been in the system to take a big leap. I mean, they need Aiden Hector to play more like what he did a couple years ago. They need Dom Jones to step up. They need Henry and Jack to have a better year than they did in pass coverage. We'll see. We'll see. I am very encouraged by Newer Gatkuth. Boom Jock, I think, is going to be a star. Chase Wilson, one of the better linebackers in the conference. I mean, there's talent on that defense. Can they be better? And there are some factors, I think, that could help the defense. Like offensively, can you limit some of the turnovers? Can you run the ball with a little bit more consistency and not have the defense be on the field so much? You don't have them playing as many snaps. Maybe they're able to play, a little bit more effectively, consistently. There's a lot that goes into that. Taylor wants to know who/what type of team should the Rams target to replace Texas Tech for 2025? How much does this football season matter in the quest to join a rebuilt Pac-12? Are we locked into that short list of teams regardless of the outcome? I mean, there's no guarantee when it comes to the future of the Pac-12. I firmly expect them to rebuild. I will say, I don't know if it's the most logical outcome, but so many of these conference realignment moves are not about logic. Ego comes into play, and you want to position yourself for the next big move as well, which is something I talked about with Mike Rowe. I will say, out of the schools out of the Mountain West, CSU on paper certainly one of the most appealing, along with San Diego State from a facility standpoint, from university standpoint. But you need the football success. You don't have the football success that Boise, that Fresno, that some of these other programs have had consistently. You want to do what you can to just create some positive national momentum again, much like what you had 10 years ago. In terms of who CSU should schedule to replace Texas Tech in 2025, you already got the trip to Washington on the schedule, so I'm not big on playing another game for a check. Find a winnable game any way that you can. That would be the route that I would go. I mean, if you could get an appealing game from a scheduling standpoint, that would be great. But we'll just kind of have to see what happens there. A couple weeks ago, I did throw out a bunch of teams. I'd like to see CSU play some older schools that they used to have relationships, like BYU and Utah and TCU, those types of schools. I don't know if that would be possible. BYU, I think, does have an opening in 2025. That would be a very intriguing game to me, a competitive game, fun regionally. I think that people would travel well for it. It would be kind of a throwback to the OG WAC / the beginning of the Mountain West. I'd certainly be open to it. Charlie wants to know Norvell recruiting success in Texas, Moby facility upgrades coming. I expect Moby facility upgrades coming. I can't speak to how intense they'll be this year, but I certainly expect it. How important is the RMS? It's huge. I mean, it's a game on CBS. It's the first time this rivalry game's been in Fort Collins since '96. It's probably the biggest home game CSU has had this century. It's huge. It's huge. Like I really can't state that enough. Someone wants to know if the team makes a bowl but drops one or both of the Rocky Mountain Showdown and Border War this year, would you consider the season a success, failure, or something in between? Look, if they win a bowl, this season is a success. But if they lose both to Wyoming and CU at home, it will certainly not feel as good. Like the lack of success along the Front Range within these rivalry games, going back to 2016 now, it's brutal. Those are the games that matter more than anything. Like I think a lot of people would probably like if you could beat CU in Wyoming but not make a bowl, but you win those two games, most people would probably take that option over, getting to the postseason. And I can't blame them. You get the local bragging rights. Obviously, the obnoxiousness of the other side of that rivalry has certainly made it so that we want it even more, than we would have before. But that's huge, absolutely huge. Evan Hodson wants to know, how are you feeling about the O-line this season compared to last season? Who are you eyeing as potential dark horse at wide receiver this coming year? I feel really good about the O-line. I think this is the best that the two deep has been since at least 2017, maybe more like 2014. Really intriguing younger guys coming up. I think Tanner Morley is going to be a star. And you feel really good about the vets that came back. I mean, Savion Henderson, Jacob Gardner, Drew Moss. That's a really solid trio of returning talent, guys that played every snap last year. Huge, really huge. And as far as potential dark horse candidates at wide receiver, I mean, the obvious are Donovan Ollie and Armani Winfield, the P5 or P4 transfers that you brought into the program. I'm going to throw out Dylan Goffney, though. He's a guy that when the passing offense was thriving last year, he was a big part of that. Got overshadowed a little bit by LB and Justice Ross Simmons, but especially with those guys no longer in the mix, I'm looking for him to have a big year. And I've heard a lot of good things. I mean, the staff, and BFN, they were all raving about Dylan Goffney throughout the spring period there. So I'm interested to see if he can kind of build off of what he did. He had a great game against Boise and then kind of disappeared down the stretch. We'll see. Finally, someone wants to know who the current football commits do you think has the highest ceiling and highest floor? It's so early, man. I'm really intrigued by Tristan Glass. If we're talking ceiling, he feels like an NFL type receiver to me that you were able to get. Highest floor, Branston, maybe the first commit. I mean, I think he comes in and right away is a guy that can make an impact for you on the defensive line potentially. Where does he go from there? We'll kind of see. Really, all the defensive line commits, like, I don't know if they're going to have like Mo Camara type ceilings, but they're all highly athletic guys that should be productive. Really encouraging. I mean, I'm encouraged regarding the direction of the trenches on both sides of the ball. A lot of inexperience behind some of those veterans on the defensive side, and that is a question mark to me. But some of these guys have popped, and some of these guys have really good potential. I mean, like Kennedy McDowell is a stud. Some of these guys on the outside, I think are going to surprise people in a major way. I mean, Mukendi Wakalanji is a guy that, you go back to that Nevada game a couple years ago, had a huge play. Newer Gatkuth has flashed, obviously. Cam Barata is a guy who I think could have a big year. James Mitchell's been in the system for multiple years. They've got a lot of guys. You just need some of these guys to step up. That's all I've got for today's show. I appreciate everybody that's been rocking with us. Shout out to everybody in the Toyota chat for keeping it peaceful. I appreciate everybody for rocking with me on a Friday morning. Just a heads up, we will not have a show next Thursday or Friday for the 4th of July. I do think we will have a show earlier in the week, though, so I'll get some information out on that. Before we get out of here, Nick in the Toyota chat wants to know, does anyone know how we line up recruiting-wise versus the rest of the Mountain West? I don't think 247/on3 are updated. Yeah, I'm not trying to be a jerk, but neither of those sites do a very good job covering recruiting in the Mountain West. Yeah, like 247 had like 2 or 3 of CSU's commits listed on the site, and they've got 10. So how do you compare it when the information available is not accurate? I don't know. That said, when you look at like the types of players that they're bringing in, I think it's safe to say it's right there at the top. It's on par with Boise State, with UNLV, San Diego State, typical schools. Taylor wants to know, do you know when the basketball schedule comes out? September? It's just whenever it gets finalized. I will say, hearing good things about the CSU and CU game happening in Hardwood. So in May, kind of sounded like it was up in the air and it wasn't looking very encouraging. I'm hearing now that they've got that deal on the books. So I think the CSU men's basketball and CU men's basketball will play each of the next 2 seasons, again in Boulder and then, back in Fort Collins, which is awesome. The game is great for the state. It's great for local interest. Both of these teams are competitive enough to where the loss doesn't kill you. There's truly no excuses for it to not be played every single year. Cannot wait. Shout out to all of you guys again in the Toyota chat. Much love. I'm always proud to be. Peace.
We all silly like the mayor.